The knock on my cabin door was so sharp it made the window panes rattle. For a moment, I thought it might be one of my friends coming back inside after a late-night walk along the dock. But when I opened the door, it wasn't a familiar face or a welcome smile. It was her Karen. Every neighborhood, every community, every town seems to have one. That person who has appointed themselves the self-proclaimed guardian of order. She stood there on my porch like a storm cloud in human form, hands on her hips, lips pressed tight, eyes drilling into me with that perfect blend of disdain and entitlement. "You," she spat, as if my mere existence offended her. "We need to talk." Now. Behind her, the moonlight shimmered on the glassy surface of the lake. Inside, my guests were laughing over a game of cards, their voices muffled through the walls, warm and welcoming. But the coldness radiating from Karen's glare could have frozen the whole shoreline. I leaned against the doorframe, forcing a calm I didn't entirely feel. "Evening, Karen. What seems to be the problem this time?" Her nostrils flared. "Don't play dumb. I've had complaints. Too many cars in your driveway, too much noise after dark. People coming and going at all hours. This isn't some cheap motel you're running here. This is a community with rules." The irony of her words nearly made me laugh. My lake cabin wasn't even inside her HOA jurisdiction. It sat just outside their neatly trimmed borders on property my family had owned for decades. But ever since Karen was elected HOA president, she acted like her authority stretched. Over the entire county, still, something about her tone tonight was different. It wasn't the usual grumbling about lawn decorations or boats tied too long at the dock. There was venom in her voice, a promise of escalation. I kept my voice level. "Karen, these are my guests, my family. They have every right to be here. And you have no authority to tell me otherwise." Her eyes narrowed into slits. "We'll see about that." She spun on her heel and marched back down my steps, her flashlight beam slicing angrily through the night. The crunch of gravel faded into silence. Inside, the laughter from my friends bubbled louder, oblivious to the confrontation that had just taken place outside. But I knew better than to relax. This wasn't the last I'd see of Karen tonight. The next morning dawned bright and crisp, sunlight glittering off the lake like shards of glass. My guests, college friends I hadn't seen in years, were already up, brewing coffee and making breakfast. For a brief moment, everything felt peaceful. Then the sound of an engine broke through the calm. I stepped onto the porch just in time to see Karen's SUV pull up at the end of my drive. This time, she wasn't alone. 2 other HOA board members. Men in pressed polo shirts and self-importance radiating from every pore climbed out of the vehicle with her great reinforcements. Karen marched toward me, as if she owned the land beneath her shoes. "We warned you," she barked before I could even greet her. "You're in violation of multiple community ordinances, and if you don't remove these people, immediately will be forced to take action." I crossed my arms. "Of all, this isn't your community. This is my private property. Second, my guests are here legally, and they're staying. So unless you brought a badge and a warrant, you're trespassing." One of the men stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "Don't get smart with us. I've already contacted the sheriff. They'll be here soon, and when they see the chaos you're causing, you'll regret ever defying the HOA." At the mention of the sheriff, a flicker of unease crept through me. I had nothing to hide. My property taxes were paid, my cabin fully registered, my guests well within the law. But the way Karen said it, the smug tilt of her chin, the certainty in her voice, it was as if she knew something I didn't. I forced a steady breath. "Then I'll be happy to speak with the sheriff when they arrive. Until then, you're not welcome on my porch." Karen's face twisted into something between triumph and fury. She motioned to her companions, and together they retreated, but not without leaving behind a final threat. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "When the law comes down on you, don't say we didn't warn you." Inside the cabin, my guests had gathered near the windows, concern etched across their faces. "Who was that?" one of them asked. "Local tyrant," I muttered. "Thinks she runs the whole lake." But even as I tried to downplay it, a knot had formed in my stomach. Karen wasn't the type to bluff. If she had involved the sheriff, then this was about to get very real. It's very fast. And sure enough, not an hour later, I heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel again. This time it wasn't Karen's SUV. It was a white sheriff's department cruiser. My friends shifted nervously, but I squared my shoulders and stepped outside. The deputy climbed out of the car, his mirrored sunglasses reflecting the cabin, the lake, and me standing stiff on the porch. He adjusted his belt, his expression unreadable. "You, the owner here?" he asked. "Yes, sir," I replied, trying to keep my voice even. "Is there a problem?" The deputy glanced past me toward the cabin. I could hear my friends inside, their voices dropping to hushed whispers. Then he looked back at me, and a faint smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "Well," he said slowly, "depends on how you define problem. Because right now, it looks like the real problem might be with your neighbor." I froze, unsure what he meant, but the way he said it, the way his eyes flickered knowingly toward Karen's SUV parked down the road, told me one thing. This wasn't going to play out the way she expected, and for the first time since that midnight knock, a sliver of hope pierced through my unease. Something told me Karen was about to regret involving the sheriff. Asterisk. The deputy's words lingered long after he left. He hadn't written any tickets, hadn't even stepped inside the cabin to inspect things the way Karen clearly hoped he would. Glance with me, and then driven back down the gravel road. But the last thing he said before climbing into his cruiser still echoed in my mind. "Keep your doors locked tonight. Folks like her don't take well to being told no." That warning set the tone for the rest of the day. My guests tried to shake it off, returning to fishing, kayaking, and barbecuing on the deck, but I couldn't relax. Every laugh, every splash in the lake, every raised voice felt like it carried across the water to Karen's ears, and sure enough, she made her presence known again. That afternoon, we noticed her SUV parked at the public boat launch just across the lake. It wasn't unusual for neighbors to come and go, but Karen wasn't there to fish or relax. No, she was there with binoculars. My friend Sarah spotted her first, elbowing me as we stood on the dock. Is that lady watching us?" I followed her gaze and felt my stomach sink. Karen stood stiff as a fence post, the binoculars glued to her face, angled directly at my cabin. "She's keeping a record," I muttered, heat rising in my chest. "Probably documenting every move we make." "Can she do that?" Sarah asked, her brow furrowing. "Legally? Sure, but it's harassment. Plain and simple." I considered confronting her, but the thought of giving her exactly the reaction she wanted kept me rooted to the dock. Instead, I gathered everyone together and explained the situation. "Look, Karen's not going away. She's going to push, and push until she gets what she wants. So just stick close to the cabin, don't engage her, and if anything seems off, tell me immediately." They all nodded, though unease flickered in their eyes. This was supposed to be a reunion, a weekend of laughter and memories. Now it felt like we were under siege that night. Things escalated. We were sitting around the fire pit, flames crackling, marshmallows roasting, when a sharp whistle cut through the air. At first I thought it was an owl, or maybe a loon on the water. But then it came again, deliberate, shrill, human. Everyone froze. The sound came from the tree line behind the cabin. I grabbed a flashlight and swept the beam across the woods, my heart pounding in my chest. For a moment, nothing. Just the shifting shadows of pine trees and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Then a shape moved. It was quick, darting deeper into the woods before the light could catch it. But I knew what I saw. Someone was out there, watching us inside. "Now," I ordered. My friends didn't argue. We doused the fire and filed into the cabin, locking the doors and pulling the blinds. Inside, the atmosphere shifted from cheerful to tense, the air heavy with unspoken fear. "Do you think it was her?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. I clenched my jaw. "Who else?" The next morning, I found proof near the edge of the dock. Wedged between two planks was a scrap of paper. I pulled it free, my hands shaking as I unfolded it. The message was scrawled in blocky handwriting. Last warning, get out. I showed it to the group, their faces paling. This is beyond petty HOA nonsense, one of my friends whispered. This is dangerous. I couldn't argue, so I called the sheriff's department. By the next morning, the air around the lake felt different, heavier, charged with tension. Even the bird song seemed muted, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. My friends tiptoed around the kitchen, whispering instead of laughing, and I hated that Karen's poison had seeped so deep into what was supposed to be our joyful weekend, but I had underestimated her persistence. Around noon, as we sat on the deck sipping coffee, we heard the low growl of vengeance. Not one, but two trucks rolled up the drive. White pickups with magnetic signs slapped onto their doors. HOA, Code Enforcement. I stood, my chair scraping hard against the wood. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. 4 men climbed out, all dressed in reflective vests and carrying clipboards. And behind them, like a general watching her soldiers, came Karen's SUV. She parked diagonally, blocking half my driveway, and emerged with her arms folded, chin raised high. Good afternoon, one of the men said with forced politeness. We're here to perform an inspection. We've received multiple reports of code violations on this property. I laughed bitterly. There is no code enforcement for this property. This isn't HOA land. You have no authority here. Karen's lips curled in triumph. Refuse inspection, and it will be treated as non-compliance. Your choice. One of my friends whispered behind me, this is insane. Are they even legit? I didn't think so. Their vests were mismatched, their official signs peeling at the corners, and the way one of them kept shifting his weight nervously told me they weren't used to pretending. Still, I held my ground. Unless you have paperwork signed by the county or the sheriff, you're trespassing. Get off my property. The man at the front stiffened. We're within our rights. No, I cut him off, stepping closer, anger tightening my chest. You're within Karen's imagination. Leave. For a moment, the air between us crackled with tension. The men glanced at one another. Unsure, then Karen snapped. Don't just stand there, document everything. One of them pulled out a phone and began taking photos of my porch, my dock, even my guests. My blood boiled. Stop it, I warned. You have 3 seconds to turn around before I call the sheriff myself. That made them falter. The man lowered his phone, muttering something under his breath. Karen's face darkened with rage. You can't hide forever, she shrieked, as they finally retreated to their trucks. The law is on my side. The trucks rumbled back down the road, Karen's SUV trailing like a shadow, but her words clung to me, chilling despite the summer sun. She wasn't going to stop. Not until she destroyed me, that night. The sabotage began. I had just settled into bed when a loud crash echoed from outside. My heart jumped as I bolted upright, my friends shouting in alarm from their rooms. I grabbed a flashlight and stormed onto the porch. The beams swept across the driveway, and there it was. My guests' cars, all 4 of them, sat with their tires slashed, rubber flayed open like wounds, my pulse hammered in my ears. Whoever had done this was gone, swallowed by the woods. I didn't need a witness to know who was responsible. My fists clenched. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was criminal. I called the sheriff again when the deputy arrived. He crouched beside the wreckage, running a finger along the jagged cuts in the rubber. His face hardened. Clean slice, he muttered. Knife, most likely. Professional enough to be quick. Karen's SUV wasn't anywhere in sight, but I saw her curtain twitching from across the lake when the deputy's cruiser lights flared. She was watching, savoring the chaos she'd sown. The deputy straightened. I'll file a report, but without a witness. He shook his head. It'll be hard to pin this directly on her. I stepped closer, my voice sharp. She's escalating. First notes, then fake inspectors, now sabotage. What's next? He held my gaze for a long moment, then his tone shifted, lower, more serious. Look, off the record. We've had issues with her before. You're not wrong to be worried. But the sheriff himself has been tracking her. She's stepped into dangerous territory lately. If she thinks she's untouchable, well, left the sentence hanging, but his meaning was clear. The sheriff's department wasn't just aware of Karen, they were waiting for her to make a fatal mistake. Sleep was impossible after that. We stayed inside, lights off, whispering in the dark like campers telling ghost stories. Every snap of a twig outside, every creak of the dock sent shivers through the cabin. And then, at 3 a.m., it happened. The sound of glass shattering exploded through the silence. My guests screamed. I grabbed the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, a heavy iron poker from the fireplace, and rushed toward the noise. The back window had been smashed. Shards glittered on the floor, moonlight spilling through the jagged hole, and on the walk sill, snagged on a shard of glass, was a scrap of fabric. Bright red, the exact shade of Karen's jacket. By dawn, the sheriff himself had arrived. He wasn't a man easily rattled, tall, broad-shouldered, his uniform crisp even after a sleepless night. But when I handed him the scrap of fabric, his jaw tightened. "This is it," he said. "This is the line she shouldn't have crossed." Karen, of course, denied everything. When deputies knocked on her door, she emerged with her hair perfectly set, her smile painted on. "What a terrible incident," she cooed, her voice dripping false sympathy. "But to accuse me? Why? I was home all night, ask anyone," her neighbors murmured awkwardly, clearly afraid to contradict her. But the sheriff wasn't fooled. He didn't arrest her. Not yet, but his eyes told me the tide was turning. "Stay calm," he whispered as he prepared to leave. "She thinks she's playing a game. She doesn't realize she's already lost." Back inside, I collapsed onto the couch. My guests huddled close. We were exhausted, frightened, angry. But more than anything, we were determined, Karen thought. She could bully us, drive us away with fear. She had no idea she was about to unleash something much bigger than her HOA power trip, because the sheriff's department wasn't just watching anymore. They were preparing to move in. The next 48 hours crawled by like a nightmare on repeat. My guests and I lived in a constant state of vigilance, every sound outside setting our nerves on edge. We didn't go out on the lake. We didn't light fires. Barely spoke. Above, whispers. But Karen didn't stop. She drove by the cabin at least 6 times a day, sometimes slowing to a crawl, sometimes stopping long enough to snap more photos. At night, we heard footsteps crunching on gravel outside the windows. Too quick to catch, too deliberate to dismiss, we knew it was her. And yet, without hard proof, the deputies could only promise us extra patrols. Then, on the 3rd night, the sheriff himself returned. He didn't arrive with flashing lights or sirens this time. He came quietly, his cruiser pulling into my driveway. Just after sundown, when I opened the door, his face was grim, but there was a spark of determination in his eyes. "May I come in?" he asked. I nodded, stepping aside. My guests, huddled on the couch, fell silent as he entered, removed his hat, glanced around, then lowered his voice. "We've been monitoring Karen," he said. "And you were right, she's escalating. But what you don't know is that this isn't just about your cabin. She's been involved in other incidents. Ones that went unreported or were brushed off as misunderstandings, vandalism, harassment, even threats." A chill ran through me, and nobody stopped her. The sheriff's jaw tightened. She's slippery. Always keeps things just shy of prosecutable. But with what's happened here, the note, the slashed tires, the break-in, we finally have enough to act. We're going to put an end to this. I leaned forward, my pulse quickening. How? The sheriff's eyes hardened. By giving her exactly what she wants. The plan was simple in theory, dangerous in practice. We would host another gathering at the cabin. Lights on, music playing, the perfect bait. Karen wouldn't be able to resist. And when she made her next move, the sheriff's deputies, already stationed nearby, would catch her in the act. It was risky, but the alternative was endless intimidation. And so, with my guests' nervous agreement, we prepared. The following night, the cabin glowed like a beacon on the lake. Laughter rang out, though it was forced, brittle around the edges. My friends played cards at the table, their hands trembling slightly. I kept one eye on the window, waiting. And then came. Karen's SUV rolled up quietly, headlights off. She parked halfway down the drive and crept forward on foot, her silhouette unmistakable in the moonlight. I held my breath as she reached the edge of the porch, camera raised, snapping photos through the windows. Then she moved closer, closer until her hand brushed the doorknob. That was the moment the sheriff's deputies emerged from the shadows. Sheriff's department. Step away from the door. Karen spun, her face contorting in shock and fury. What? No? I live here, protecting the community. But her excuses crumbled as the deputies surrounded her. She screamed, flailed, insisted she had the right, that she was the law. My friends watched from inside, wide-eyed. As the woman who had tormented us was finally forced to confront real authority, still, even in cuffs, she didn't stop. You don't understand? She shrieked at the sheriff as he approached. They're criminals! They're running an illegal operation in that cabin. You'll see. You'll all see. The sheriff's expression didn't change. Calm, steady, unshaken. He nodded to his deputies, and they guided her firmly toward the cruiser. But before they reached it, turned back to me. We're not done yet, he said. Mind if we step inside? My guests stiffened, exchanging nervous looks. But I trusted him. I opened the door, and the sheriff stepped in, his presence filling the room. He studied the cabin for a long moment, the worn wooden beams, stone fireplace, the framed photos of my family. Finally, he spoke. This place has history, he said. I recognize it. Belonged to the Thompsons before you, didn't it? I nodded slowly. My grandparents bought it from them back in the 70s. The sheriff's gaze lingered on. The mantel, where an old photograph of my grandfather stood in a dusty frame. Then he turned back to me, his voice low. There's something you need to know about Karen. Her obsession with this lake. It isn't just about HOA power. She's been convinced for years that people are using these cabins for illegal activities. Drugs, smuggling, you name it. She's filed complaints, staged confrontations, even tried to rope deputies into sting operations. Every time, nothing. But she won't let it go. My chest tightened. So we're just her latest targets. He nodded. But tonight, we've got her on trespassing, harassment, and destruction of property. That's enough to stick. And once the judge sees her history, for the first time in days, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. But then the sheriff's eyes darkened. Still, he said quietly, you should know. When we searched her SUV earlier, we found more than just cameras. I frowned. What do you mean? He hesitated, as if deciding how much to reveal. Finally, he said, she had a list. Names, addresses. Yours, your guests, even mine. You weren't the only ones she was planning to go after. A chill swept the room. My friends exchanged horrified glances, their faces pale. The sheriff replaced his hat, his expression solemn. She thought she was untouchable, but now she's in our hands. When the deputies finally drove her away, the night fell quiet in a way it hadn't in weeks. No footsteps in the woods. No flash of binoculars across the lake. No engine idling in the driveway. Just peace. And yet, as I stood on the porch staring at the ripple of moonlight on the water, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wasn't finished. The sheriff had warned me, obsession like hers doesn't vanish overnight, and while she might have been taken away in handcuffs, something told me part 5 of this nightmare was still waiting. The morning after Karen's arrest was the first time I'd heard birdsong without dread. Sunlight glittered across the lake, calm and unbroken, and for the first time in weeks my guests smiled without forcing it. The air smelled of coffee and pine instead of fear. But peace was fragile, because while Karen had been taken away in cuffs, she hadn't been silenced. The sheriff stopped by later that afternoon. His cruiser rumbled up the drive, gravel crunching under his tires, and when he stepped out, he carried a folder thick with papers. She's already posted bail, he said grimly. Didn't waste a minute. Her lawyers filed motions, claiming harassment, abuse of authority, you name it. She's doubling down. My stomach sank. So she's coming back? Not yet, he reassured. The judge issued a restraining order. She can't come within 500 yards of your property or your guests. But this isn't over. We'll need you to testify. I swallowed hard, glancing back at my friends. They were tired, worn down from nights of fear and constant vigilance. But when I met their eyes, they all nodded. We weren't going to let Karen rewrite the story. Court was 3 weeks later. It felt like stepping into a different world. The wood-paneled room buzzed with whispers as neighbors, HOA board members, and even curious locals filled the benches. Word of Karen's arrest had spread fast. People were hungry for answers. Karen sat at the defense table, immaculately dressed, her hair pinned back, lips curved in a smug smile. If not for the deputies flanking her, you'd never guess she'd been caught trespassing in the dead of night. When her eyes met mine, I saw no fear, only contempt. The proceedings began, and the prosecution wasted no time. They laid out every piece of evidence: the threatening note, the slashed tires, the broken window, the red fabric caught in the glass. They called the deputies who'd caught her creeping around my porch, camera in hand, and then they called me. I stepped onto the stand, my hands trembling slightly, and swore the oath. The prosecutor's questions came steady and calm. Did you invite your guests to the cabin? Yes. Were they breaking any laws? No. Did Karen or the HOA have authority over your property? None whatsoever. I recounted the notes, the fake inspectors, the smashed cars, the sleepless nights. As I spoke, I saw heads nodding. In the gallery, neighbors who had once been silent, now recognizing the same patterns they'd endured. Then it was the defense's turn. Karen's lawyer rose, his voice smooth as oil. Isn't it true, he pressed, that your guests were disruptive? That they disturbed the community with noise, traffic, and reckless behavior? No, I said firmly. They were here for a reunion. We played music, we cooked meals, we fished on the lake. Nothing illegal, nothing dangerous. He tried again. And you claim my client threatened you. But did you see her leave that note? Did you see her slash those tires? I held my ground. No, but the pattern speaks for itself, every time. Something happened. She was there, watching, recording, and when she broke into my cabin, she left part of her jacket behind. The lawyer hesitated. Karen's face tightened, and then the prosecutor dropped the final blow. The sheriff himself took the stand. He spoke not only of my case, but of the years of complaints against Karen, the false reports, the fabricated evidence, the harassment, of anyone who dared defy her. Revealed the list found in her SUV. Names, addresses, targets, mine, my friends. Even his own. The courtroom buzzed with shock. Neighbors whispered furiously, the tide turning in real time. And for the first time, I saw something flicker in Karen's eyes. Not rage, not triumph, but fear. When the verdict came, it was swift. Guilty of trespassing, guilty of harassment, guilty of criminal mischief, guilty of intimidation. The judge's voice rang firm and final. You abused your position of influence, terrorized your neighbors, and endangered public safety. This court sentences you to 18 months in county jail with probation to follow. We're in Botto, and you are hereby removed from the HOA board, permanently barred from holding any such office again. The gavel struck. Karen's face collapsed, her smug. Masks shattering. She screamed, a raw, furious sound as deputies led her from the courtroom, and just like that, the storm that had shadowed my cabin broke apart. Back at the lake weeks later, the air felt different. My friends and I returned, determined not to let her memory poison the place we loved. We rebuilt the fire pit, patched the broken window, replaced the tires. Slowly, laughter returned to the cabin, echoing across the water without fear of binoculars tracking us. One evening, as the sun dipped below the trees and painted the lake gold, the sheriff stopped by again. He leaned on the porch railing, watching the light dance on the ripples. She's gone, he said simply. With the damage she did, it'll take time to heal. I nodded. She almost ruined this place for us, but she didn't, he said. You stood your ground, and you weren't alone. I looked back at my friends, gathered around the fire, their faces lit with warmth and peace. And he was right. We hadn't let her win that night. As the stars spread across the sky and the lake lay calm and quiet, I finally felt it. Closure. Karen's reign of fear was over. The cabin was ours again, not just wood and stone, but laughter, safety, and memories. And as the fire crackled and my friends' voices rose in song, I realized something important. Karen had tried to control everything, tried to wield power that was never hers, tried to twist the law to her will, but in the end it wasn't the HOA, or her lies, or even her fury that decided her fate. It was the truth, and the truth had finally set us free. Asterisk.